need to put it on the ballot because it's already in the charter. Parkland is inalienable. So anytime anyone does need or is interested in any way utilizing public parkland for any private use, they do need to go to the ballot. There is already sufficient protection in the charter. I think it's important to understand what was really happening at Tamian. I couldn't vote at the time because at the time my wife worked for Rocket Ship. But I was there at the beginning before she started working there, putting that plan together. And I think it's important to understand what was at stake there. At the time, we weren't building any parks at all in the city because we had no money to maintain parks. The general fund was completely tapped. We were running $120 million deficits. So there was a complete halt on any park development. So we had an opportunity to partner with a public charter school that was willing to maintain the park that we would then build. And they would put eyes on a very dark corner of an area that was not yet a park. It was an empty lot that we were purchasing from VTA. They would build a parking lot. They would build a tot lot, open those up to the public after school hours and on weekends, and they would maintain the park itself at no cost to the city. It seemed to me that was a win-win for the community. We have to look for these opportunities because we have very scarce resources in this city. And if we don't look for these opportunities, we're going to have a very difficult time serving our residents at a time of scarcity that's going to continue for the foreseeable future.
So I'll talk about John Mice Park. I voted for that. I thought there was high value there. I thought there was a capital infusion and also maintenance from Archbishop Mitty High School. This really activated a park and made it a higher throughput of people enjoying it. And we at the council had a lot of residents that were opposed to it. And I sided with Councilmember Constant. And lo and behold, after those improvements have been made, from what I understand, the majority of those residents are quite happy and content with the improvements that have been made to the park and the amount of people in them. What always puzzles me is someone that purchases a home next to a park and in proximity to a park, and why are all these kids here yelling and playing games and sports? I just want to look at green grass. And I'm here to tell you, if you're by a park, expect it to be activated under a mayoral term of Oliverio. You're going to have art in the park, you're going to have sports in the park, and we really want to make it happen. More people in these open space areas makes our community come together, and it makes it safer. We're not here to just, if you want a quiet area, we have Oak Hill. That's an area, we can go over there. But the reality is we want parks that are active and fun. So thank you.
Top that, Rose.
How do I follow that? We don't count Oak Hill as part of our open space. Okay. So I just want to say, in continuing the theme of how challenged our Parks Department's been, they got cut by 48% during all this budget crisis. 48%. It's amazing they survived. You know how they have? Because they've been innovative. And because they achieved 40% in cost recovery. So that means for every 60 cents, you get $1 worth of services for our Parks Department. So I just want to kudos to them and how well we've been, how well they've been working under tough conditions. So, the idea of the city being able to invest in land and create a park and then having a partner maintain it, that is the formula. That's what's been heard over and over again at this table. And I think that is the successful formula. I supported Mice Park too. Not because it was the perfect solution, it was the best solution. And when you're sitting up there on the council dais, that is what you have to look for, is to try to achieve the best solution. And for us, for me, it was making sure we did have a better park space for folks in District 1. I don't support giving park land over to private development or private ownership, but I do support public-private partnerships. As I have worked out in Lake Cunningham with the community, I would support things that get in more, help us gather more use fees with private folks, potentially serving a role in our parks, but not ownership. Always the public first.
Okay, thank you. I'm losing track of where we are here. So we're starting with Dave next. Well, let's talk about turf. And by that I mean grass, actual living stuff. The Parks Department has indicated that grass uses so much water, it's likely to be phased out generally in parks over time in favor of artificial turf or other surfaces. Not just playing fields, official playing fields, but play areas where kids can go and play. other cities, particularly Los Angeles in California, they're finding ways to make turf and other natural surfaces more sustainable in their water use in other ways, and instead of turning to more artificial surfaces. Which direction would you take as mayor, Dave?
Well, I would err on the side of natural turf. Call me old school, but that, I think, is what a park should be. It should be very natural in appearance and texture, if you will. And I think when people want to go to the park and throw down a blanket or something like that and sit down and have a picnic, they want to sit down on grass. I think there's some maintenance issues that might be unintended consequences if you went all to turf, even the state-of-the-art turf that's used now for football fields and a lot of those kind of uses, because it is sensitive in certain ways. If kids drop gum or something along those lines, it's not going to just disappear. It's going to increase maintenance costs in a different way. I think drought resistance, obviously, in this day and age is very important. We're at the end of a 3-year drought right now. We're not at the end. We're in the middle of a 3-year drought, perhaps. We don't know how long it's going to go. So there's going to have to be a balance in terms of what we do, but I think you will see more and more parks develop with a combination where the playing fields and the places that have the greatest amount of ordinary foot traffic and so forth are turf, and places for people to relax remain natural grass.
Thank you.
Well, I'm just happy to be at a debate where we're talking about grass and marijuana dispensaries aren't the topic. Yeah, my answer isn't
Give us
much
time.
different than Dave's. Look, I understand the technology is emerging. I think we have to keep an open mind to all this. If there's an opportunity for us to give the best of everything to a community, then we should do that. But the reality is artificial turf, in many instances, is going to be preferable where you've got a field that you know is going to get a lot of use. And the whole idea here is to get kids out there exercising, get adults out there exercising. And we're facing a major obesity epidemic in this country. Let's just get folks out there in any way we can, enjoying the outdoors, the 300 days of sun a year. In some instances, we know grass is going to be preferable for leisurely and passive recreation. So I think we're probably going to continue to do both, and it's going to depend on the context.
I was thinking about the supervisor's analogy about throwing down that blanket at the park, and I'm like, yeah, God, I hope there's a responsible dog owner there that was there before. Because so many times, you have these irresponsible dog owners that give dog owners a bad name, regardless if it's artificial or natural turf. So I think as well, high utilization soccer field is a natural candidate for a artificial field. While I think other lounging areas, might be good for the natural turf. I know that some of you that are really into landscaping out there, you love your succulents, and certainly that would be a way for landscaping. But then there's also that, I think it's that pampas grass, which is that thing that you don't mow, that it doesn't require the maintenance. But I am open to water being the limitation. What I'm not open to being is the labor cost as a limitation. So oftentimes we said, geez, this maintenance of the natural turf is so expensive. But the reality is what we know is that the city of San Jose finally took a step in having competitive bidding, having private companies manage maintenance in our parks. And we just did it on 2 acres, not the rest of them. But just on those 2 acres, that line item used to be 4.1 or 4.2 million. The new line item for those parks that are maintained is 1.3 million. So let's not let the cost be an issue. I'm open for water because there is scarcity in this world, but I don't want to have the price of how the city does business today versus how it could do business differently be the detriment.
Pampas grass, sounds like politician grass, but okay. The first time I heard about artificial turf, I have to say I had a prejudice against it. But it has improved, and for the very high impact areas, I think it can't be avoided. I think we need to accept there's going to be some of it. But I'm also very interested in looking at making sure we're using native plants and using drought-resistant plants, because far too many species have been planted in our area that really don't belong here and crowd out the natural plant life. So I think we should use this drought as an opportunity to get back to some of those more drought-resistant and native plants in any way we can. notwithstanding, I know it's nice to have a patch of green that we can throw a blanket on, but I think we have to look at how we are treating water, not just for the next 3 years, but for many years. If we look at global climate change and what could happen in our area, we're looking at a scenario where we could pretty much be a desert, and that is our history. So I think we really need to look at that and make sure we're planning accordingly.
Well, if it's if it's a personal preference, then of course I would love to go to a park where the grass is green and it's nice and soft and it's a little bit wet. But unfortunately, putting our political hats on and realizing that we don't have sufficient funds to provide maintenance for our parks, not having the funding to open more parks like we want to, I think combinations of having artificial turf would be sufficient for certain parks. For example, I live on Communications Hill. There's a turnkey park around the corner, and it's beautiful. It has grass, but in the Todd Lot area, it's artificial turf. And I took my daughter out there. She's 2 years old, she's Olivia, and she's having a great time. And for me, it's like I'm glad as a mother because she doesn't have to eat the grass. And so in that little spot there, I mean, it makes sense to have artificial turf. And I like it. It's soft. It's nice. She can run around. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that if there's an opportunity not to close down the park because we don't have enough funding, then putting artificial turf there, if that solved the problem, then I would support that.
Well, we're not going to further explore the idea of edible parks, but I do want to go back to something Pierluigi mentioned, the operation and maintenance costs. And we're going to do something a little different. We're going to go back around the other way. So I'm going to start with Rose this time and swing around. The city has used operation and maintenance costs for parks as a barrier to developing new parks. So the city has started using some outside contracting for some park maintenance under certain circumstances. Should that be expanded if it's less expensive? Should the city invest more in organizing volunteers to try to take care of parks, something more than the current Adopt a Park program, something that really is more comprehensive? Any of those ideas seem attractive to you or others? Rose?
Yes, all of them. So, yeah, I think we need to look at where we can contract out. I've supported contracting out janitorial services at City Hall, graffiti maintenance, augmenting our city staff with being able to have a contractor provide that to increase our ability to provide service, and I certainly would agree with that with park maintenance as well. I also strongly support a volunteer program, adding more volunteers. Our Parks Department, again, got cut by 48%. And that was because we had very challenging years. I mean, over $300 million of deficits are what I saw the last few years being a council member. I certainly didn't get to figure out how many parks I could open and have extra money to do things. We've had really challenging times where we've had to face layoffs, and public safety is a huge issue. And unfortunately, the department that got cut the most is our Parks Department. So we have to be really creative and look at ways to keep it going. And the other issue, of course, is to fee for services, which we've done really well. As I've said, 40% they get a 40% increase or cost from their fees taking in. So that's really, really important in how we manage the park business.
This direction.
Yes, that's right.
So yes, I would be supportive of all. I've historically been supportive of all. One of my first things I ever proposed was to simply have a pilot where we would allow a private company to come in and help manage the maintenance in the park. That was met with huge hostility from the labor unions, and the only person to second my motion was Mayor Chuck Reed. Lo and behold, after we had more of a recession take place and more hard choices, we finally did that outsourcing, as I mentioned earlier, 3-to-1 cost savings. I have a lot of residents that live across the street from the parks, and they've told me that the parks that have been outsourced, they've never seen it look better. So the quality is there. Also, with that ability, you do have the ability to change contractors if they're not doing the work. Obviously, in the Rose Garden, we've had an incredible success. People from the neighborhood and outside the neighborhood and adjoining cities, that meant something special for them to volunteer. And the Rose Garden just got the Frontline Parks Award, which is awarded to parks in the United States for outstanding achievements, and they allotted that the achievements of the volunteers and taking a park that was really disheveled, and then 3 years later being the #1 Rose Garden in the United States, a year later winning international awards when we're competing with other countries and for those awards is a big deal. And they said that the volunteer amount of time put just into the Rose Garden was worth $1.3 million. So I think you have to at least allow the option. And, worst case scenario, let it fail, but so far it hasn't.
Thank you. Sam?
Certainly whatever we can do to support volunteers, and frankly, I think the city often gets in the way more than they support volunteers, but I'd like to find more ways to leverage the energy and creativity of our residents in getting out there and supporting our parks. Certainly I've supported contracting out when it's appropriate. I'm not ideological about it. I'm pragmatic in some instances where we can maintain quality of service and do it savings to the taxpayer, provide other services. I'll support it. But with regard to other options, I think we should keep in mind those aren't the only options on the table. There are development agreements, for example. As I pushed a few years ago with the Newhall Park, at the time, again, we weren't building parks because we didn't have money to maintain them. So I pushed for a development agreement that would essentially reduce the park development fee on the builder in that case, in exchange for the builder's commitment to dedicate funding for ongoing maintenance of that park. And that was the only thing that enabled us actually to go forward and build the Newhall Park, which is there today. So we can be creative, and we need to be creative, and we need to partner with nonprofits like the Guadalupe Park Conservancy, which I think is growing now and will, I think, soon, within the next half decade, be able to take on those kinds of responsibilities. Or partnerships like the Levitt Foundation, which I'm now trying to encourage to get involved in St. James Park. There are a lot of partnerships and opportunities we can take advantage of if we're creative enough.
Dave?
Yeah, I think on the maintenance side, there are a lot of things that we can do, and a lot of it is just looking back and using some of the best practices the city has used in the past. For example, in the Evergreen Specific Plan, which is an area of about 4,000 homes, our moderator may remember this, she was writing at the time, as I believe, editorials about that project as it was developed, but the developers didn't just pay for parks, but they had to pay in ongoing into a community facilities district. So throughout this double dip recession, you could drive through that entire community of 4,000 homes, 11-acre parks, pocket parks, landscaping, and see people out there cleaning up, working constantly without interruption because the money was always there. There's legislation pending now in Sacramento. I don't know the exact status of it, but a lot of you might want to get behind this. And that has to do with the ability of homeowners associations to now qualify to do improvement districts. And if that happens, you can imagine 2 or 3 homeowners associations getting together and going to the city and saying, look, you have the capital money to buy a park or a trail. You've got $300,000 or $400,000 in the construction and conveyance tax fund. Don't tell us you don't have the money to operate it. We'll take care of that. And there's a letter of agreement that it's much like a joint use agreement with the school that happens between the homeowners associations and the city. These are things that could be enacted now, right now. They don't need to wait till 2015. And I'd like to see that happen.
Well, I support all those methodologies. I think, if we have the opportunity to contract out part of our services so that we can maintain a park, we ought to do that. I completely support Adopt the Park program. Last year, just alone, we had 3,700 volunteers that actually helped with providing maintenance for parks. That's equal to about 30,000 of hours that our volunteers put together to maintain our parks throughout the city of San Jose. How awesome is that? And if we can get more volunteers, that's great. I'm sure, out of the 3,700 volunteers, 36 are volunteers of the Rose Garden in District 6, which is great, though, because this park actually won so many national awards, and it really brought San Jose into the spotlight in terms of a park that has been showcased here in our country. And so I think that if we have opportunities just to get people to volunteers, it really brings them a sense of belonging. When you volunteer and help a park, you feel like that's your park, and you maintain that, and you actually look around you and ask other people to maintain that as well. So to me, it's not just the volunteerism that is important, it's creating the sense of belonging and the sense that this park belongs to me, and I think that's very important.
Thank you. So let's turn to sports fields, and we start with Pierluigi this time. The projects from the bond measure are mostly in the works or completed. But the city still won't meet the needs identified in its 2008 plan for sports facilities. The neighborhoods will still be short. The city will still be short. How would you address this, as well as address access issues? Talked about fees helping to pay for parks, but there's a sense that it's very difficult for kids just to get out there and play. There is a limitation because the fees for use are high, and club sports can be very expensive for kids to get into. Could you talk about those issues, please?
Well, it's sort of what we've been talking about. I mean, we've been talking about what's our cost of doing business. And if our cost of doing business is this high, and it's an impediment to people utilizing the park, then that's what it is. But if my cost can be brought down, then it certainly would bring more opportunity in those parks. So I really believe it's all about the cost model. I believe we need to do it in the most efficient, cost-effective manner. Therefore, who's going to benefit? Residents, families, children, youth sports, all those types of things. So I think that's really where it is. And your question sort of talked also about I think sort of about access to schools, but we sort of covered that topic. But Barbara, I think there was one other portion that you had on your question.
Well, the city is still, based on the 2008 plan, still short of sports fields, period.
Then I think that would come back to your first question, which you discussed. Do the residents want to go above and beyond and tax themselves to pay for those benefits? Because you can have a plan, but if a plan's not funded, it's not going to happen. And we have plenty of plans in the city that sit on the shelf that are made with some ideal expectations, but sometimes don't have the rational ability to implement. And so if this city wants more parks or sports fields or what have you, then we have to allow the ability for those residents to speak and speak by voting, and voting to tax themselves for that benefit.
Okay. Sam?
Yeah, certainly, we've talked joint use agreements to death, but I think we all recognize that in a city with about 100 sports fields, we're well behind the national standard, which I think would have us somewhere around 220, 225 sports fields for a city this size. So we've got a long way to go, and joint use agreements have to be a critical path of getting there. Right now, we have a 20-year parks plan that calls for us to have essentially one joint use agreement signed each year to get along our long-term plan. Well, that's not nearly enough if we're going to get to where we need to get to. And so really we need mayoral leadership to bring together 19 school districts and talk about how can we come up with a uniform agreement that multiple districts can sign on to, where we can really scale this opportunity to get more sports fields out there into the public inventory, not locked up behind a gate. Certainly some of the other ideas that we've talked about are helpful, green benefit districts and other types of mechanisms. But I think we all recognize that this is a city that's largely built out. The opportunities for new space are limited, so we may need to look at some spaces that are already being utilized in different ways. Right now, El Pueblo's, we currently have one of our 3 golf courses, Pueblo, which is too short to really be profitable in any way and self-sustaining. And maybe that's one that we have a community conversation about is that an opportunity for us to build sports fields rather than running golf courses at a loss?
Thank you. Dave?
Yeah, having served on Eastside High School Board for 8 years, I'll tell you one of the problems with joint use agreements for sports fields with the schools is wear and tear. You definitely have a programming problem because people want to play on the fields all about the same time, including school-organized sports. So that's a problem. But the wear and tear is huge, especially with some sports like soccer. You can't keep the turf on the ground long enough for the next team to play. And I think what's going to have to happen is we're going to have to locate facilities and spread them around the city, essentially centralizing larger scale organized sports activities. As a member of the County Board of Supervisors, some of you know that we started the master planning process for the fairgrounds anew, and the first thing that I asked the board to do is to put a green space or park element into the master planning process, into the guidelines. There is an area of 150 acres that I think should be devoted largely to open space and recreational needs, if not entirely. You're not going to have that kind of an opportunity again in the future in this city to take that kind of land mass and devote it to these kind of needs. And as the city continues to diversify, now we're hearing people want cricket fields, people want variations of everything, and it just takes a lot of real estate. I don't think those sources of funding that you highlighted earlier are going to be anywhere near enough to buy the large pieces of real estate to get this done. We may be able to do some development agreements. We've got to keep our eye on that ball, but we've got to look at the last large public open spaces and do what we can with those.
A rebuttal, Pierluigi?
A question for Supervisor Cortese. The general public seems very cynical on the development of the fairgrounds and the Board of Supervisors over multiple terms of actually ever getting to a plan. When do you think, that's actually going to be cemented, that there will be a plan for the fairgrounds, it'll be X amount of park, X amount of development? Do you think it'll be hammered in by 2015, 2018?
Yeah, I think this Board of Supervisors is moving very aggressively to put a plan together. I know past boards tried to develop the property into various things, entertainment centers, concert halls, concert venues, subdivision type development. This Board of Supervisors is open to community input as to what goes on there, and that master planning process is now being led by Supervisor Chavez and has a pretty good track record of pulling community engagement together, enlisting the people in the community to develop packages like that. And I believe under her leadership and the rest of the board, that'll get done sometime during my first term as mayor of San Jose.
Can I rebut that?
Certainly.
Actually, I'm glad to hear that Supervisor Chavez is actually leading the charge on this, but if I remember correctly, at the last joint city-county meeting, she was also talking about using the fairground as a potential village to house the homeless community. And so that's the plan that's actually articulated by the same supervisors that's actually, taking the charge on this. So I'm not really sure what's going on and what kind of communication is happening between the 5 Board of Supervisors. But obviously, looking at the fairground sites, which is 150 acres to house the homeless community versus what Supervisor Cortez is saying is a designation for open space, it's just 2 very contrasting ideas, and I'm just hoping that there's some, some kind of an agreement between the Board of Supervisors, because I'm not really hearing that.
Oh, I get a
Would you
rebuttal
like-
to the
yes,
rebuttal?
30 seconds?
Yeah, honestly, I think, I didn't hear Supervisor Chavez say that, but I think an interim use of the fairgrounds for homeless instead of 52 police sweeps a year and pushing them out of our creeks and taking all their belongings away from them, I think it's a heck of an idea. I don't think that should preclude us from going forward and creating parkland and recreational uses there over time. But if we need transitional housing, again, we need large, it's another one of those areas where we need large pieces of real estate to stabilize people and move them on, give them a leg up. Maybe both can be done.
Thank you. Actually, I'm going to jump to a question from the audience. Where are?
I didn't get to answer
Oh,
that
I'm
question.
sorry, Rose.
Okay. Well, I can tell you one thing that's not going to get built at the fairgrounds. The last remaining money for the Measure P project, the softball fields are going to be built at Arcadia. And that was under some discussion for a time, but they're going to be built there, and that's the last remaining money out of that bond measure, $228 million that provided a lot of great things. Community centers, trails, parks and some fields. We have soccer fields that are being built, and now we'll have the softball fields in. And Parks and Rec staff really supported it being built out there, and we also are getting the developer to donate 12.5 acres. And I think, getting donors to donate land and to help is another part of the puzzle here, too. We know we have someone in District 10 that's donating millions of dollars for Steinbeck Park. We have this donation that's happening with Arcadia. There's other significant donations. I think we need to work hard with the folks in the community to make sure that we take advantage of those donations as well as all the other partnerships. I think it's really important. I know we keep talking joint use, but we do need to continue to work with schools throughout the community to make sure that we are utilizing, being able to work together with them to provide these amenities. We did in Ocala, as I mentioned at the beginning, Ocala, we have 3 new fields there, working with Ocala to provide sports opportunities. These fields across the street from Eastridge are going to allow tournament play. They're incredibly important, not only for the youth, but for adults. And yeah, we're field deficient. I mean, it's said that in the national, it's been written in national magazines that we need to have more fields, but I think we're going to have to pick these opportunities and work towards them to make it happen over time.
Thank you. So have we gotten around now?
Yes.
Are we? Okay.
We lost.
I'm so confused. One of our audience questions touches on the homeless issue, which I was deciding whether it was truly a parks issue, but I realize now it absolutely is, and it certainly is in some of the larger encampments. So let's talk about, from a parks perspective, what is your solution to getting the homeless out of the parks, protecting the environment, protecting the creeks, and also getting people into a productive environment and safe environment? Are we at Madison?
I can take it.
I forget, who is the next?
Sam.
Sam, all right, Sam, there you go.
Who was that?
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Well, there is no one solution. This is a really complex, challenging problem because it involves human beings, and human beings, obviously, who are in their predicament for lots of different reasons. And so we need lots of solutions, and there is simply no pot of money to be able to go house the thousands of people currently in all of our parks, our creeks, and our streets. What I push is a series of different initiatives. One is trying to get downtown streets team down here. A couple years ago, we started a pilot project in Coyote Creek. We leveraged some funding from eBay Foundation, Water District, and other sources. And now at the 2-year mark, we see that they've employed 55 people who are permanently housed or cleaning the creeks they once lived in. Dozens more are also working full-time, and they're in transitional housing. And I'm working on ways to expand that program now citywide in various ways, partnering with different corporations who are willing to sponsor gateways that Downtown Streets team can also be cleaning around the entrances to our city. So we can expand programs like this in partnership with great nonprofits. I also led an initiative to rehabilitate some of our rundown motels, to use them for housing. And fortunately, the council approved a pilot of that project a couple weeks ago. We'll launch that this summer. Rose Herrera joined me with an initiative we'll be launching in the Rules Committee next week to identify opportunities for micro-housing on public sites, landfills, or for instance, locations like the old Armory, where we can build a lot of housing very cheaply. So we'll continue to work on a lot of different solutions, but that's the kind of leadership I'll be offering.
Thank you. Dave?
This is a problem that's going to take a lot of different tools in the toolbox to deal with over time. And at the county and the city actually have been working together very closely and I think productively so far on this, but just putting a dent in the problem at this point. On the county side of it, we put $1.2 million into Destination Home to get people housed, chronically homeless housed. We put another $1 million into Section 8 vouchers when the federal government cut off the funding to keep people from being evicted. A lot of them would have been out in the parks. And we've agreed to divert all the redevelopment funding, the tax increment that's no longer going to go to redevelopment for housing. A portion of that will come to the county, and we're donating that, if you will, to the Housing Trust for affordable housing. Ultimately, housing is the answer. But as I alluded to a few minutes ago when we were talking about the fairgrounds, we need to get people from where they are into some form of stabilized housing. And what we have currently isn't enough. That population out there in the parks, for whatever reason, despite social workers and everybody else trying to work with them, they do not want to go into traditional homeless shelters. They seem to have dignity, a certain degree of privacy, and sometimes family issues involved. We're going to have to try a more central approach to getting people into temporary living quarters, stabilizing them, giving them a leg up with all the resources that we do have, and we have a lot at the county level and at the state level and so forth.
Thank you. Madison?
So on any given night in the city of San Jose, we have a little bit over 4,000 people sleeping on the streets. And in the county alone, a little bit over 7,000 people are sleeping in the streets. We have approximately 60 homeless encampments throughout the city of San Jose, with the biggest one on Story Road in my council district called the Jungle. And in this homeless encampment, we have roughly around 150 to 200 people on any given day. I've been down there a couple of times. Yes, temporary and permanent housing would be a short-term solution, but what we need to do is look at this long-term solution. How can these people become self-supporting and self-sufficient? If we provide them temporary housing or temporary shelter or permanent housing, if you can't get them a job and they can't become self-supporting, they're going to go back in their old ways again. And so that's the challenging issue that we have here in front of us. And so I think it's going to take a mayor that's going to put this at the forefront and said, how can we eliminate homelessness in the city of San Jose by providing adequate housing and make these people become self-supporting again? How can we do that? I think we can actually tap into federal funding for this. HUD provides opportunities for the city to acquire funding to help with these types of programs. And as a mayor, this will be a priority for me because I think we need to do everything we can to get these people into temporary and permanent housing and also provide them opportunities so that they become self-supporting.
Homelessness is a big issue, and there's a lot of different reasons why people are homeless. We have everybody from veterans out there to families to individuals who've committed crimes who are preying on other people who are homeless. It's certainly not a one-size-fits-all reason why people are out there, and it's not a one-size solution either. So I have supported Councilmember Liccardo's ideas on renovating the hotel as well as the small homes. There's other ideas about taking some empty buildings. I think Vice Mayor has suggested that. I think there's a lot of different great ideas to take pieces of this problem. But along with creating some housing, in terms of looking at some of the empty buildings, we could find a solution there if we look at what San Diego and other cities have done to provide some housing and some services in these buildings. But if we do that, then we also need to have a pathway for if those folks who do not want to accept those services, who do not want to come in and receive those services, then we need to also have a way to move them along. Our creeks are in great jeopardy, in the environmental damage that's being done there is also very serious. So we have to look at compassion and we have to look at enforcement as well.
In approximately 2009, I wrote an article called Creekside Living. And that's where I went into the homeless encampments with the San Jose Police Department and all the folks that have done their minor misdemeanors that are doing their community work. And, you go down there to these facilities, and they've built some pretty intricate places, even electrical power from car batteries, et cetera. And there's a large population there. And, of course, the consequences to our creek is that there's really no sanitation there. And that's why we have issues with our federal oversight in managing our water supply. And I think that's the part that really touches parks, is especially on trails, is that people, let's say it's on the Guadalupe or the Coyote or different creeks in San Jose, don't necessarily feel comfortable when they see homeless individuals and encampments alongside the creek. And if they don't feel comfortable, then they won't utilize them. What's interesting, though, is that they don't seem to be in Los Gatos, and they don't seem to be in Campbell. And the situation is when cities like San Jose that are generous, have all the issues of a climate, we sometimes get more or less more of the issue. And it's certainly a regional issue. And I think we're all challenged on how to do it. We have some great programs that people have talked about, but that's really 2% of the population that it's assisting, and the larger portion of the population is not. And it's whether that's going to be from federal stimulus to go build $500 million worth of housing, or that's from a county-wide regional tax where even Palo Alto does its fair share.
Thank you. Sam?
Yeah, I think, I've heard a couple different suggestions of where we wait for others to step up for us, whether it's federal funding somehow to come to the rescue. Well, CDBG and home funds have been cut more than half over the last several years. And there's no hope that we're going to see federal dollars rain from the sky as they did in the time of stimulus, as was suggested earlier. Waiting for Palo Alto to house our homeless isn't going to get us very far either. The reality is, when we go and do surveys of these encampments, as we did just a month ago, we learned that over 90% of the folks who are in the encampments, in fact, last lived in an apartment in San Jose. These are our folks. We need to take responsibility, and that takes leadership here. It means we don't wait for others.
Just as a 30-second.
Oh, yes,
You're
right.
about- yeah, so I don't see any way out of it. I mean, literally, this is a problem bigger than any one city. And when a problem is a societal, large, billion-dollar type of issue, one city can't do it. And when I bring up Palo Alto, is because those voters had the opportunity to accept a small number of affordable housing units, and they rejected it. And San Jose has always done the lion's burden of housing and low-income housing, and it's come at a cost. Because I mentioned earlier, is all these developers that live in Saratoga were exempt from paying their park fees. These are issues that we have to deal with.
Thank you. Let's, I think we're back to Dave. I think. Sorry.
Ask the audience.
It's been one too many for him for me too. San Jose once had 28 park rangers. Now it has 8. Rangers cost less than police officers, and they can provide, they can improve the safety of parks and the perception of safety in parks, because that's important to making people feel they can use the parks. Would you support adding rangers as part of your public safety strategy? We have money for police officers. We can't fill the openings as quickly as we would like to, get people trained as quickly as we'd like to. Do you think adding park rangers makes sense for public safety?
Yes, I do, and I'll come back to the main question in a moment, but I think that restoring a dedicated workforce in the city of San Jose across the board is job number one. We have a demoralized workforce. I think trust has been broken, especially with the public safety officers, and we've lost a lot of them as well. We had 1,350 5 years ago when I was on the city council. There's 906 cops today, but we can't just focus on police officers or firefighters. We do need to restore rangers. When you look at how the city's budget is built, I hope it's still being done this way in the last 5 years, with city service areas. And city service areas link together different areas of the city that are important, that need to work together for the benefit of all of our community. And when I was on the city council, we purposely linked parks and the police department. People said that at first it doesn't make sense. But we linked them up because the relationship between having safe parks, having safe community centers, having safe places for kids to go, and the community policing work that we were trying to move along with a full police force in those days was a very, very important relationship. So you need both. It's not either or, it's both and. We need both and we need to restore that workforce as soon as we can.
Thank you. Addis?
I would definitely support hiring more park rangers, simply because I think that it was just really unfortunate years ago that we had to lay off a lot of park rangers due to the budget deficit. But we have an opportunity now to hire them back. It's not the same people, new people. But, when you look at the overall San Jose, when people make a 911 call, you don't really get the police to respond right away. We all know that. I'm sure many of us in this room experience that. It's because we place our calls based on priority. There's a violent crime happening somewhere in North San Jose, that's where the police officers are going to go to. If you have someone who's robbing someone's home, most likely they're not going to respond until 5 hours later or the next day. And so having park rangers fill in certain things that are being done at the parks, at different open space throughout our city, is something that I would definitely support. And I think that also it's just really, really important that when we go to the park, we see a park rangers, either on a horse or walking around, we feel safe. And that's very important, especially for kids or for the elderly population. To see the presence of park rangers throughout our parks in the city of San Jose is this sense of safety that we feel, and that's why I think it's so critical to bring back some of these park rangers.
Thank you. Rose?
I do support adding additional park rangers. In fact, that's going to be one of my budget requests. we use them in many different ways. It's already been said, they help keep our parks safe, they augment our total public safety force. We've also used them in the past. They were very effective in terms of making sure that once homeless folks were no longer living in a creek, to keep them from coming back into the creek. And I do think that, as I said before, we need to use compassion, and we also need to use enforcement. San Jose has to make sure that we protect our creeks too. And so once we get some solutions where some of the folks that are living, and I'm thinking of the jungle right now, when we can provide opportunities for them to move out into a better condition, I think once they are moved out, we need to have those rangers, because when we use the rangers to manage the park, we had fewer settlements coming back into the parks. When they no longer were there to patrol, then we see a replenishment of the homeless camp in the park, in the creeks.
Thank you. Bill Ritchie?
Sure, I certainly would support more park rangers. Is it part of the public safety plan? I think there's an argument for that. I also think there's an argument for a code enforcement employee that writes the code violation that stands along a police officer in certain situations to also be part of the public safety. I think how you add more park rangers, I'll give you one idea, and it's not a lot, but it would maybe add about 6, is currently today the city of San Jose does its own payroll. So we're the ones who process our checks and all that. Well, most private companies you go to, even as big as Cisco Systems or Hewlett Packard, they outsource their paychecks to ADP or Paychecks with an X at the bottom. And that's essentially, they're able to manage that whole deal. And so therefore, the people that you would normally use to manage that service, they're not needed. There are other jobs in finance they can do, but what have you, those open up the opportunities for funding dollars to fund those park ranger positions. And if we have 8 now and I can give you another 6, that's almost 100% better by just making that one change on how we do our payroll.
Sam?
Yeah, I certainly support more park rangers, but I think the right answer is yes and. Let's face it, our park rangers aren't just chasing Yogi and Boo Boo around. There are some scary characters out there, and we need police too, and we need both. And that's why 6 months ago I put together a strategy to identify the funding we would need to start to restore our police department. And council approved that strategy nearly unanimously. We're now in agreement to restore pay with our police officers, the 11% pay that was cut through the recession. We've now had our 3rd class graduate from the academy. Obviously, we know we're having serious issues with retention. That's why we're working on issues around ensuring that disability is made clear to all of our new recruits, that if they're hurt in the line of duty, they'll be taken care of. And we'll restore police, but we've got to do both. And as mayor, I'm going to do both.
Thank you. Let's move to something a little more micro here. And we'd start with Madison. There's a proposal before the council that would permit groups of up to 150 people to gather using amplified sound without having to get a permit, or clean up after themselves or anything like that. They couldn't serve food, but of course they could bring food. Now, I realize this proposal is going through a lot of different iterations, and I think it was motivated to try to get more spontaneous activity downtown. It is a concern to a lot of people who live near public parks and who have events with permits at public parks. So, what's your general position on allowing gatherings like this with amplified sound, with potentially loud noise or music, in public parks? And should there be something that protects groups that actually have a permit for an event in a park?
Well, I definitely think that they need to acquire a permit from the city of San Jose before they can actually perform in the parks. I'm a big fan of music. I think music in the park is great. It's definitely one of the greatest programs, not just in San Jose, but I think just in every city, because they just bring a lot of vibrancy and bringing people together. But at the same time, if you have these events in a neighborhood park where you're surrounded by residents, then obviously there's going to be a noise issues and noise complaints that we hear, every Monday morning when we get to work. And so I think that I would support issuing permits for folks who wants to play music in the park, but it has to be a park that is somewhat away. There has to be some kind of barrier or wall so that it doesn't impact the residents in terms of the noise. But that's to say that, I think I support all musicians. I think it's great that people can actually showcase their talent in a public space. But at the same time, we need to also consider that if they're actually bringing music or noise to the neighborhood.
I know that this issue's been under discussion at various committees, and we have had the city attorney take a look at it. I think the idea was to try to make it easier for not just groups in downtown, but groups throughout the city that want to get together and hold events, because sometimes the city can really get in the way of groups trying to do things that really benefit the community. But then again, there's always unintended consequences. And so I think it depends on the space. And certainly some of the main spaces downtown, I know that folks were concerned about those kind of gatherings, and I think that there needs to be a different kind of procedure for those spaces. We need to make sure that we use common sense. If we've got a group that wants to get together in a little neighborhood park and have a gathering, and it's not going to be impactful, on the neighborhoods, I think we need to streamline that process. Obviously, if they're going to have amplified sound and it's going to create problems, then it needs to be a different kind of process. So the idea is we want to make it easier for community groups to come together and do things that actually benefit the community.
So I believe, honestly, that all five of us could talk about this one just for an hour, because there's so many nuances of what can go on in a park and the different scenarios. And I'll give you an example: amplified sound. Right? As soon as I thought, my rock concert, what is that? Well, at the Rose Garden, we did the Easter egg hunt last Saturday. Amplified sound. Someone had to speak to tell the kids, hey, let's get everyone ready for the egg hunt. You needed a permit for that, to put the 1,000 eggs out there on the lawn and have the kids do it. That would obviously be sort of a low impact. The higher impact might be just that, a concert of people playing sporadically or spontaneously. So I think there's a interesting thing we're going through, and it's coming back to committee, I think next Monday, and then it'll go to council, I believe, in May. But when we do these things, there's always the attorneys involved, because there's the freedom of speech that you really can't censor by content. You sort of have to make it a fair process for everyone, but in a fair process for everyone may create the scenario that people are uncomfortable with. And so that's why this one has taken a little bit longer to vet out. And again, I seriously think if we had the Parks Department here giving us 5 different examples, you might have 5 different opinions. So.
Yeah, I agree
Sam?
with everything that Pierre Luigi said, except for the idea about us talking about this for an hour, because I'm not sure any of you guys would be left. Context is everything. We have to draw bright lines. The city attorney tells us that. I think the bright line you draw is around geography. Certainly there are contexts in the downtown where we have parks. We expect them to be activated. And it's really hard on festivals and nonprofit organizations that want to have events that draw activity and make for vibrant parks and vibrant downtown, because the red tape is brutal, and we should make it easy for them in those contexts. On the other hand, a lot of the kids I grew up with in their garage bands, you wouldn't want them in any of your neighborhood parks, and they should have a permit. And I think we can draw a line around those areas where we would allow this to be a permit-free zone and make the rest of the city one where we're safely protected.
Dave?
Yeah, it seems to me that you want to regulate the place, which is constitutional, parks. You want to regulate the time and the manner, which is constitutional. And the way to do that is a lot of the organizations that use a park, they use a bullhorn or something like that. For example, the Martin Luther King Walk last year, which came out of St. James Park. It's a once-a-year activity. Have an ordinance or a policy that says the decibel level can't exceed X, whatever is appropriate. And if anybody's going to do that activity more than once a year, then they need to apply for a permit, make the permit fee nominal. I think one of the things that's happened at the city that's frustrating for people who use the parks, who want to do Easter egg hunts or other activities like that, is that the fee and permit process seems excessive. I got an email today from somebody who wanted to use a softball park here in downtown San Jose for a softball tournament. He said the fees were excessive, but moreover, they couldn't tell him when it was going to be available or not. That's the kind of problem that frustrates people greatly. Make it simple, make it clean, And people are doing once-a-year activities, let them do that and move on.
Thank you. Let's see, we're at Rose, and we have another question from the audience that I think is a good one. The city's green vision does not include parks. Will you, as mayor, include parks in San Jose's green vision? And what would that mean to you? What would be your vision for how parks fit in?
Yes, I would include parks. It's kind of surprising they're not included. I think that's a really good question. Well, I think that we have a goal. We have a goal to make sure that everyone would be able to access a green space within a 10-minute walk. And I think that's an admirable goal, and I think the Green Vision has many goals like that that are not going to be achieved today, but have a vision for doing that, whether it's creating thousands of jobs, whether it's reducing our footprint, our pollution footprint in San Jose. So I definitely would support adding to the green vision the idea that every resident would be able to be a 10-minute walk from a park.
Mr. I would not. I think the green vision is challenging as it is on many levels, and I think parks should be where they are in parks. I believe, though, we should work more on our urban forest and trees. So I believe, anything that's allocated in the city right now dealing with trees, simply move it over to our city forest, who does a much better job with every dollar that they get than we do as a city. And their green volunteers and tree amigos would be able to increase the canopy in San Jose to, I think, the level that we all want. We're not on an ocean. We don't have necessarily scenic mountains everywhere in San Jose, but when you do, it does feel special and neat as a neighborhood when it has that tree canopy. And I think if we can do that and use our scarce dollars and allow our city forests to maximize it, then we'll have a better product in the end, and that matches our green vision of all the amenities that you all know what trees do to both on the ecosystem and our communities and neighborhoods.
Thank you. Sam?
Well, the Green Vision does put out a vision of 100 miles of trails. And I don't really want to pit trails against parks. I think we all agree they're both very important, both extraordinarily valuable to the quality of life of the city. I would want to find a way to better integrate our trails vision with our parks vision. And that is not simply try to shoot for a numeric goal of 100 miles, but let's connect our major parks by trail to ensure that every child and every adult can get to a park through a trail within a reasonable walking distance, to be able to avoid the traffic, to avoid all those barriers that exist in an artificial environment that we have in a big city like this, and be able to take trails to parks where they can enjoy a Saturday afternoon.
It's my turn.
Yes.
Started here. Yeah, I absolutely think the Green Vision should take parks into account. And I was on the city council when the Green Vision came forward. In fact, I was on the city council when we created the Transportation and Environment Committee. There was no committee on the city council during that period of time, the mid-2000s, to even bring an environmental initiative forward. And two of us walked into then Mayor Ron Gonzalez's office and said, as the council appointments were coming up one year, you need to change this committee. You need to add environment to it. There's a lot of expertise in this city and pent-up energy that wants to bring forward something like a green vision for this city at large. That was done then, and when Mayor Reed took office, he took it to heart and brought forward what we now know as the Green Vision. But the whole point of it is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That is the idea with it, not just to make green parks. So the idea of connecting transportation and parks in such a way that you're reducing greenhouse gas emissions really should be what it's all about. And that's what that vision should be all about ultimately, because 60% of our greenhouse gases comes from automobiles or vehicles of other kinds. Anything we can do to create a parks environment that helps reduce those vehicle miles traveled is going to be a big deal.
You?
every mayor who comes into office wants to create his or her own creation or her own vision. And Mayor Chuck Reed obviously is going to leave a very prominent legacy with his green vision. And if I'm elected being the new mayor, this is an area that I don't mind expanding on. And I think that incorporating parks into the mayor's green vision is something that I would support. Right now, currently, we have 3,400 acres of open space in the city of San Jose with, like I said earlier, 193 parks in our city. And so with 193 parks serving 1 million people, it definitely is not adequate. So I would definitely expand on the green vision, do everything we can to have more parks in our city. Again, it could be turnkey parks, neighborhood parks, as long as we actually capitalize and expand on our open space. That would be something that I would completely support.
Thank you. I see some folks looking at watches, and I just remembered I did not mention, there was some confusion about the ending time for this.
10:30.
Right, 10:30. No later than 11, for sure. The plan was for 2 hours to go to 9 o'clock. I believe that's what the candidates understood.
Right.
The Eventbrite invitation was for 8:30, so we are going to keep going here for a little while. If you have to leave, please do. Actually, I think what I will do now is go to a sort of lightning yes or no round, and just for a brief time, and then we'll see where we are with time. I want to give you all time to wrap up, to tell us whether you'll be the mayor who embraces parks and moves them forward. So let's do some yes or no questions. We don't have paddles, unfortunately.
We have this.
We could use yes.
So
Yes.
You can put
Use
a-
this for yes.
Red, no, blue, yes.
yeah, I don't think everybody has a red now. Let's just say raise your hands if you're a yes.
Okay.
And if I don't see 5 hands, I'll clarify who's a no. Okay. Folks, clear out a little bit. First question. The green print is really a wish list. The state has set up a blue ribbon commission to figure out how to actually achieve its goals of expanding and maintaining its parkland. Would you support setting up a blue ribbon commission to figure out how to actually carry out the green print? Yes or no? Yes?
Yes.
There's no response.
This one's tougher.
Steph?
Well, I mean,
Let's-
yes, but
Okay. Do you want to do a quick?
how about 20 seconds?
Let's do a quick round. One or two sentence answer. And I guess we'd start with you.
I would say no, because I've provided the alternative. Allow competitive bidding, you'll bring your costs down and provide more parks.
Sam?
We already have a Parks Commission. Let's use our Parks Commission. I've never been a fan of blue ribbon commissions. They usually don't get much accomplished.
Dave?
I definitely would. I mean, when I was on the city council, and certainly during my time on the board of supervisors and the school board, enlisting the community in these solutions, in the vision, in the master planning, was everything to me. And that's what I want to do as mayor of San Jose, is enlist the city of San Jose, every single neighborhood association, every single individual in these kind of processes. There's nothing more fun than that.
Madison?
Well, I just know that I love the parks, but I'm not an expert on parks. So if there are people out there that would love to volunteer their time and let us know what is the appropriate way to actually create more parks in the city of San Jose, I'll be more than happy to listen to their ideas.
And Rose?
Yeah, I'm not sure we need a blue ribbon commission to do that with the green print, with the Parks Commission, with other organizations that are already involved. I certainly wouldn't hesitate to create that if after I become mayor, it looks like we need that, but I'm not ready to sign up for it today and say we absolutely need that.
Okay, let's try this one for yes or no. The city is committed to building dog parks in every planning area, which is not the same as every council district. Some planning areas have a number of them now, and others have none. Are you committed to dogs? Are you committed to fulfilling the commitment to our canine residents? Yes?
My dog will get me if I don't say yes. They'll wait for
Okay.
me at home.
All right, we are all in favor of dogs here. That should be politically safe.
Don't ask my cat.
There are proposals to use the Park Trust Fund as incentives for developers to build and maintain private open space. Others say the money in the Parks Trust Fund should only go toward public parks. Do you support using the Parks Fund to subsidize private open space? Yes or no? Yes? We have 5 no's on that one, I got, okay? There are grants available for parks projects, but the city has to front the money. And sometimes the Parks Department does not have the cash to do that in the particular area where the project is to be built. Would you commit to finding a source of money that parks could use to pay for work that will be reimbursed by outside sources? Yes or no? Yes?
Potentially.
You want a response on this one? Or?
Sure, if you'd like to. With Sam, why don't you
I
go
mean, that's
first?
what construction conveyance tax money is for. It's more fungible. We can move it around. That's what construction conveyance tax money is for. It's more fungible. We can move it around the city more easily.
Okay, but I gather there is a problem currently that it's not getting moved around. Will you commit
Yes,
to?
absolutely.
Okay. Did you want to say anything else, Dave?
Yes, I mean, it's just a simple yes for me.
Okay.
I want to say yes, and I've supported using money from construction conveyance from my district to support another project.
Okay.
And yes, it just depends on what the length of borrowing is, the term.
Okay. Riparian corridors. The city currently has a guideline of 100-foot setback from development, for development from creeks in all but a few limited circumstances, downtown, for example, in some areas. Should this be a requirement in law instead of a suggestion that developers negotiate? Should this be an ordinance? Yes or no? 5 yes. Thank you. See, I thought they were going to want to talk about that one. And one more, actually 2 more questions here. Should San Jose set standards for converting neighborhood-serving parks to regional parks? There's a proposal now, for instance, to put cricket complex at Shady Oaks Park down in the Coyote neighborhood. Should San Jose set some kind of rules for doing this kind of conversion? Yes or no?
Doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
Doesn't, okay, well,
I
we
don't
have
think
this,
ever did.
doesn't happen that often. Might it happen more often? Let's do a 2-sentence. Now, are you saying yes, Sam?
Yeah, I'm saying yes. Like, I recognize folks don't want to lose their neighborhood park. If there's an opportunity for us to set some rules so everybody knows what the rules are, I think it's helpful.
I think it's subjective. I think it's based on the situation. If so many people are saying this is what we need to have, then I think a political body that's elected can be swayed.
Anybody else want to comment on that?
I say yes, that we should make sure that we have, that we do have some parameters around it.
I say yes too.
I'm comfortable taking them one at a time.
Okay. And a question from the audience that I think we can do as a yes or no. Some tennis courts are monopolized for private, for-pay tennis lessons. Do you think this is an appropriate use of public space for profit? And would you change the rules around that? Let's turn that into a positive question. Well, let's say, do you think it's okay for private tennis lessons to be given on public courts and monopolize them so that
Are we assuming
People-
they're paying fees?
this is an audience question, so I don't know if the lesson givers are paying fees. In theory, okay.
I don't know. When I was a kid, I used to take tennis lessons at Paul Moore Park, and the lady that taught me to play tennis, I don't know if she paid fees or not, but that's where we met at. But I could see the conflict if someone sort of has a great calling and is taking up all the courts teaching and not allowing anyone else to play.
Yeah, I don't know what the fees, I mean,
Yeah.
I think when you have fees, the fees do help support the courts possibly, but I do think you have to have a reasonable, amount of time open for the public to be able to use it, so.
Anyway, Sam, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I mean, same as Rose. Look, we should create opportunities to generate fees so we can maintain our parks because we know they need lots of resources and we don't have enough now. as long as we constrain the time to ensure that the public has access, it should be enough.
Dave, did you want to?
Yeah, I think the operative word in the question is monopolize. I mean, I don't think anybody should be allowed to monopolize. It's right back to privatization again of a public park. So there needs to be some rules that prohibit that. And if that's what's happening, then we need to come up with that.
Well, thank you. I think we're at a point where we need to give our candidates 2 minutes to wrap up and tell us. I bet nobody's going to say, I'm not going to care about Parks as mayor, but tell us why you will be the best mayor for Parks. And why don't we start with, well, let's start with Madison. Go
Okay.
around.
Let me just stand up for this part. Well, first of all, thank you again for being here and for listening to us for the last hour and a half. I love the parks. And the reason why I love parks is because I feel like it's the only amenity that I had when I was a little girl growing up in a very poor family, that nothing prevents me from having that. And now being a mother of a 2-year-old, I want the same thing for her. I want to guide and lead a city where my daughter and every child in this city can have access to public parks, and a safe park, that is. And so it's not just a political want, it's a personal need and a personal desire that I want her to have, and for every child. And so you will see that if you elect me as your mayor, is to go out there and really advocate, do what we can to have more open space in our city, to allow our kids and our elderly populations to have access to this tremendous amenities that we have. We live in such a prosperous city, a city that people around the globe are so envious. And to live in a city where we don't have access to public parks, I think it's almost like a tragedy. I have a situations right now on Communications Hill where we build this stairway case and everyone is coming to exercise, and we're getting numerous complaints from our neighbors every day. We never knew that this is going to pose a problem. It's a good problem to have, but I don't think that anybody who lives on Communications Hills agree with me. But I like to have that kind of open space in every neighborhood where people don't have to go very far to appreciate what they have right there in their backyard. And so that's the kind of mayor that I will be, someone who is not just talking about in rhetoric about being a proponent park, but someone who's going to put that in action. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Rose?
Well, thank you, especially those of you who have stayed, for listening to us, and appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you. Parks are really important for our mental health, for our physical well-being. I was fortunate enough to grow up and be able to have access to green space, and I want to make sure that everyone in this city does, that they can walk within 10 minutes to get to some green space where they can enjoy that peace of mind. Green space is not only important for those reasons, but also for economic development. When somebody comes to our city to decide if they want to be in a city, they ask, where's the school, where's the library, and where's the park? Parks are really, really critical for that too. And we need to make sure that we have them. In my history at being on council, I've not only supported parks, but I have fought to make sure that they stayed around when they were in jeopardy. Lake Cunningham is an example. And I've also worked really hard when we needed to bring an amenity, softball fields to a location where we hadn't had them before, and when it was the right location for the city, I fought for the softball fields and worked with developers to get a donation of land. So I'm not somebody who just talks about it. I actually make things happen with our parks and with other things in terms of economic development. As your mayor, I will have a great vision. I'll join you and support your vision, because I know that a lot of the folks in this room have a lot of expertise in parks, and a lot of you are advocates and have fought hard for it. I would like you to join with me as mayor, and let's make this city a vision of the best parks of any city in the country.
Nice. So for you, the park advocates, I'm going to ask that you continue the charge of making parks relevant, because there's a good chunk of the community that doesn't utilize our parks. They have private recreation, they do what they want, but they never step foot. And it's different than the library, where we can actually count how many people come from the door and how many people check out a book. But parks, it's a little bit more difficult. We know at different stages of our life, we utilize them more, but I think that's what we need to keep current, because we're here to provide a service to everybody, and that one of those is your Parks Department. And for all of you that have traveled, you know that parks and open space bring a level of sophistication to a city. They bring these beautiful points, opportunities where they really beautify an area, and I think that's what we have to look at when we're designing these parks to how nice and pretty can we make it. I think that's important. I have never voted for a single housing development that's been exempt from park fees. I voted against every single one of them. And you know what? Now when I'm going for fundraising donations, I'm not getting those donations. But that's what, you have to take a stand. Is it okay for some communities not to have a park versus other communities do? And when we passed up on all these fees, we missed up on the opportunities for providing more open space. And I think we need to, we might be faced with doing a parcel tax to pay for some of that we lost. On the other quotient, I've been very outspoken that I just truly believe that competitive bidding with a private company to do the maintenance stretches our dollars further so that we can have more quality parks maintained, and we can also have more parks, because we made a mistake. We had money that we could have been building parks, but we chose not to because we didn't have the maintenance dollars to do it. If we had just went full board and done the competitive bidding, we could have built those parks and had the same dollars to maintain much more acreage. And that'll be my tenure on the city council, is trying to provide you the most bang for your buck, and I hope you'll select me as your mayor.
Sam?
Well, I want to thank many people in this room who I know have been longstanding advocates for parks and open space and trails. Collectively, there's probably 1,000 years of experience, and that's not just because you're all old. I mean, there's a lot of experience in this room, and I know I've seen many of you week after week at City Hall and in lengthy meetings, and I appreciate the energy and persistence of many of the people in this room, and I thank you for it. As we experience great cities, we think about how it is we remember those cities. And we don't generally experience them moving 45 miles an hour down an expressway chained to a steering wheel of our car. We experience great cities on foot, in our parks, in our paseos, our plazas, our trails. That is the pedestrian experience that defines what is great about cities for us. That's where we encounter a farmer's market. That's where we see a guitarist playing outdoors as we're sitting in a nearby outdoor cafe. That's where we see our friends or we meet new ones. This is what will make San Jose great, is an opportunity to create vibrant public spaces here in our city. Not just in our downtown, but in every urban village, every neighborhood. The opportunity to bring us all outdoors to enjoy 300 days of sunshine a year. Parks, of course, also enable us to leverage the extraordinary creativity and energy of our community, as so many of you have demonstrated, to create great opportunities of civic pride. We see it just outside the door here at Parque de los Pobladores, where we see art and our parks merging. Certainly, just last week, we celebrated an effort I worked very hard on with Rotary to launch Rotary Children's Play Garden, fully accessible to children, right in Guadalupe Park. We see it in opportunities like in Pequesto Park, where the Luna Park Art Festival now brings thousands of people every year. These are great opportunities for our community. I will be the mayor that will expand those opportunities for everyone. I hope you'll join the Sierra Club and California League of Conservation Voters in supporting me.
Thank you. Dave?
Well, thank you. Sometimes old is good. I will tell you, I worked at the school board level from 1993 to 2000. We're talking about this key relationship written right into the general plan between schools and the city of San Jose. I understand that relationship from both sides. I went on to the city council. I learned how to work with people on the school board. We built the first new high school in Silicon Valley, Evergreen Valley High School. First one built in 25 years, and I think the last one built. And we did that with community involvement. The entire master plan for that school was devised by community participation. So when I got on the city council and I was told we didn't have enough money to build any one park, we started to cobble together money like I was telling you about in the first question, setting it aside in reserve accounts. And then we brought the community in and we started working with the community neighborhood by neighborhood by neighborhood. So there became a Fowler Creek Park and a Falls Creek Park and a Hillstone Park and a revamped Groesbeck Park and so on and so forth. And then we did community meetings all the way along the Thompson Creek Trail with people meeting after meeting after meeting. I like that work. As mayor of San Jose, I will meet you where you are. We will master plan parks in this city together. You will have the opportunity to do that once again, working together once again with the mayor of San Jose and the city council to master plan and build the kind of parks that you want, not the kind of parks that the general plan says or some other plan says, or that the mayor's office staff says, or that the Parks Commission says, but the kind of parks that you want. That's the kind of city that I stand for, a city that works together, and I think we can work together again. I think this can be the kind of a city that's one of the greatest, most extraordinary big cities in the country, but feels like a small town when it comes to these kind of issues, because you're all involved. Please vote for me as mayor of San Jose and give me that opportunity to work with you once again.
Thank you all very much. I am told Helen Chapman would like to come to the podium. Several people would like to. Here we go.
On behalf of the San Jose Parks Advocates, we have a little present for you, if you wouldn't mind holding it so the audience can see. But it actually says, yes, here we go, 8 ways parks can improve your health. So we thought you'd enjoy a little night reading tonight. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, candidates, and you've been a great audience. Good night.